Hello, my name is Nicholas Diak. I'm an independent scholar, and I'm one of the co-founders and co-chairs of the AnnRadCon Academic Conference. My presentation, Correlating the Contents, Mimetic Desire in the Call of Cthulhu, will be about taking Rene Girard's theory of mimetic desire and applying it to H.P. Lovecraft's short story, The Call of Cthulhu. So first, I'll be giving a brief overview of who Rene Girard is and his work. And next, I'll define what mimetic desire is while using the triangular depiction of mimetic desire. I'll do a quick plot recap of the Call of Cthulhu, mostly underscoring elements important to this presentation. Then I will place the Call of Cthulhu on the triangle of mimetic desire and show how it is also cyclical. And finally, I'll posit some potential applications of Girard on Lovecraft's work, setting the stage for future scholarship. Now, Rene Girard, he was a French scholar and philosopher known primarily for three key works. The first, Deceit, Desire, and the Novel, which focuses on the notion that desire comes from mimicry of others. And he uses example from great works of literature to underscore this theory. Second is Violence in the Sacred, which expands on this by showing how violence that comes from conflicted desires can be staved off with sacrifice. And finally, Things Hidden Since the Foundation of the World turns to religious scripture as a means of understanding this violence further. But for this presentation, we'll be leveraging the scholarship from Deceit, Desire, and the Novel. So, what is mimetic desire? Well, Girard begins Deceit, Desire, and the Novel with a passage from Don Quixote, soon after Quixote has been inspired by the works of Amadis of Gaul to become a chivalric knight and go out and do knightly deeds. Girard uses this example to illustrate his notion of desire being mimetic. Quote, Don Quixote has surrendered to Amadis, the individual's fundamental prerogative. He no longer chooses the objects of his own desire. Amadis must choose for him. The disciple pursues objects which are determined for him, or at least seemed determined for him, by the model of all chivalry. We shall call this model the mediator of desire. Chivalric existence is the imitation of Amadis, end quote. So what does this mean? Well, first, desire is mimetic. Humans will copy others in their desires. In other words, you want something because someone else wants it, or you perceive that someone else wants it. People do not know what they want, so they imitate the desire of others. Desire, which is cultural, is different from needs and appetites, which are natural. So, you being hungry is not necessarily a desire. When two desires converge, they can come into conflict, and this can create a rivalry or violence. And this can be best illustrated on a triangle. So, we have the mimetic desire triangle. On this triangle, A is the subject. And in Girard's open example, this would be Don Quixote. B is the object, our entity, our concept, and so forth, that is desired. For Don Quixote, it would be chivalry. C is the model, our mediator, you can kind of use both terms interchangeably, is the entity directing the desire. In this case, Amadis of Gaul. So Don Quixote desires chivalry because Amadis desires chivalry. Quixote's desire is from point A to B. It is a mimicry of Amadis's desire, which is C to B. The bottom line of the triangle is a measurement for the potential of conflict. The further away A is from C, the less likely for conflict. This is called external mediation. Something is keeping A from C. The closer A is to C, conflict, violence, and rivalry can arise. This is called internal mediation. In theory, the more A works toward B, the subject toward his object, the sides of the triangle shrink as A becomes more like C, which causes the distance of conflict to shorten. Conflict doesn't have to shorten, though, depending on the type of model. In the Don Quixote example, Amadis of Gaul is long deceased, with Quixote getting his desire by the reading of his deeds. This is external mediation. The alive Quixote will never come into conflict with the dead Amadis. So he's still being directed by Amadis through his words, his texts, and his thoughts through literary work. But Amadis as a person is not there. So there is no, there's just no way that they can come together. So they're not in conflict. So can this notion of desire and the triangular configuration be applied to H.P. Lovecraft's The Call of Cthulhu? It most certainly can. So, in The Call of Cthulhu, the narrator, Francis Wayland Thurston, is going through the effects of his granduncle, Professor George Gamble Angle, who died under mysterious circumstances coming back from the city's port. Thurston stumbles upon Angle's papers that detail his research into the Cthulhu cult, notes from dreams, and from a New Orleans inspector who had a confrontation with the sect. Juggling between belief and disbelief, Thurston starts his own investigations and validations of these papers. He eventually happens upon the diary of a sailor that details his encounter with Cthulhu. Thurston himself becomes deceased, presumably via the same mysterious ways his granduncle passed before him. So, in the triangle, the Call of Cthulhu's narrator, Francis Wayland Thurston, is the subject. He is the A. He's down here. The Cult of Cthulhu is the mediator, the B. I kind of flipped it. It went A, C, B. The Cult of Cthulhu is the mediator, the B. The object or concept of desire is C. C for Cthulhu. Now, Thurston and the cult desire Cthulhu for different but related reasons. The cult wants Cthulhu to awake and usher in a new era. Quote, that cult would never die till the stars come right again, and the secret priests would take great Cthulhu from his tomb and revive his subjects and resume his rule of earth. The time would be easy to know, for then mankind would have become as the great old ones, free and wild and beyond good and evil, with laws and morals thrown aside, and all men shouting and killing and reveling in joy. Then the liberated old ones would teach them new ways to shout and kill and revel and enjoy themselves, and all of earth would be aflame with a holocaust of ecstasy and freedom, end quote. End quote. Within the text of Call of Cthulhu, Thurston makes his own desires overt. Quote, the matter of the cult still remained to fascinate me, and at times I had visions of personal fame from researches into its origin and connections, end quote. And, quote, I was on track of a very real, very secret, and very ancient religion whose discovery would make me an anthropologist of note, end quote. But both desires, though slightly differently interpreted, are one and the same. They're both Cthulhu. Just one wants Cthulhu for the forbidden knowledge, and the other wants Cthulhu for the power that will usher in a new era. So how is Thurston's desire mimetic? Initially, he has no desire. It isn't until he first learns of the cult while going through his uncle's notes and learning of the cult's goals that his own desire is triggered. If the model, the cult, was not present with their own desire, then the subject, Thurston, would not have his. In the process of diving into the world of the Cthulhu cult, his path to his desire, which is this side of the triangle right here, Thurston's distance of conflict down here shortens. With every piece of information unearthed, accumulating in his reading of Johansson's diary, this leads to Thurston's eventual demise, the actual violence or conflict, when the worldwide yet secret Cthulhu cult assassinate him. So with every piece of information, reading the dream notes, the bas relief, the Inspector Legros, and the diary, this point comes closer to this point, and that creates the conflict. And in this case, the cult of Cthulhu succeeds in that conflict by, well, killing him. This also illustrates the mimicry of Thurston becoming more like the cult of Cthulhu, at least in a knowledge sense. So as he gains knowledge, the forbidden knowledge path up here, he becomes more like them. That's also the mimicry of this. But Thurston is not the only one in the Call of Cthulhu triangle of desire. Before him, his granduncle, Professor Gamel, was the subject until Thurston took his place. And with Thurston's death, his notes and summations of his findings will be passed to another subject. So this notion gives the triangle a cyclical aspect to it, something that wasn't present before. It begins with Gamel, or Engel. Through his mimesis, he's the subject, comes into conflict with the cult, the model or mediator, which ends in violence, Gamel's death at the port. This triangle, so as that process goes, the triangle shrinks. When he is killed, the triangle resets. Now, Thurston takes Gamel's role as the subject. His journey is the same. However, he adds to it. Gamel provided the initial notes, the dream documents, the bas relief, the Inspector Legras story, and so on. And to this base, Thurston adds his own notes and thoughts and his musings of the journal of Johansson the sailor. Thurston then comes in a conflict with the cult, which also ends in violence, his death, and the triangle resets again, with the implication that another subject will soon take his place. And that's the ... because we don't know who the next person is. It's the reader. In this case, it would probably be the reader. So you are the subject. With each resetting of the triangle, material is added to the mimesis. Because of this, each reset has the conflict base, this area down here, start shorter and shorter. As you can see here, it starts with Gamel, it shortens a bit with Thurston, and it shortens again with the next subject, who will in turn, no doubt, add their own findings, repeating and resetting in the closing in of the conflict's distance. Eventually, the subject and the model will occupy almost the same position on the triangle. It's sort of like, if you take two numbers and, keep having it, there'll always be something to have. So they won't quite overlap. But they're very close to each other, so there's going to be a conflict. And this could lead to a few outcomes eventually. One, the subject eventually triumphing over the cult. Are the cult eventually releasing Cthulhu? The stars will be right. Or perhaps assimilation of the subject into the cult. So what are the applications of using the lens of Girard's mimetic desire on the works of Lovecraft? It certainly provides a different perspective on the relationship of why characters do what they do in these stories. There are other examples of mimetic desire found in other Lovecraft texts. In The Tomb, the character of Jervis Dudley mimics the deceased Jervis Hyde by sleeping in his coffin in the mausoleum and more or less becoming one and the same via reincarnation. In Shadow of Innsmouth, it takes on a Kafkaesque element with actual transformation of the subject, Robert Olmsted, becoming a deep one, the model. Application of the triangle to these texts and more would certainly yield interesting results. This also sets the groundwork of applying Girard's other theories, such as violence and sacrifice. For Girard, humans engage in sacrifice to satisfy the need of violence that arises from conflicts formed from desire. But in Lovecraft stories, this idea doesn't always work. For example, in The Dreams in the Witch House, the sacrifice of the child by the hands of Kezia and Brown Jenkin is successful, yet it leads to more violence, specifically in Brown Jenkin killing the story's subject, Walter Gilman. So while this may seem contrary to Girard's theory, it actually demonstrates something else, the otherworldliness of cosmic horror. Girard's theory of sacral violence works in a normal world, our real world. But in the world of cosmic horror, the laws are different. Shapes don't behave correctly, portals to other worlds spring up, and unfathomable cosmic deities are plentiful. In this world, sacrifice doesn't hinder violence, it reinforces it, which adds weight to the unnaturalness of cosmic horror. Basically, it doesn't work. The theory doesn't work, which underscores the world not working. And finally, this notion of mimetic desire has applications in game theory. It can actually be quantifiable and measurable. Look no further than the tabletop role-playing game of Call of Cthulhu, which uses a mechanic called mythos points. As players do their respective detective work and uncover more and more of the unnatural world of cosmic horror around them, they gain mythos points that measures their understanding of it all. It does come at the cost of their sanity going down. Mythos points becomes the measurement for the very same activities the subjects of Gamel and Thurston were engaged in the short story version of Call of Cthulhu. All right, thank you very much.